Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is our Q3 Boulder, Colorado, even though we're all virtual, HubSpot user group event. Today we're going to be talking about HubDB and kind of the different use cases there. It is one of those tools, I think, within the HubSpot platform that gets overlooked a lot. And it may be, to Jory's point, of maybe it's just like an intimidation thing, or I don't know how or why I should be using this. But hopefully after today's session, you'll have a good understanding of what that looks like and kind of ways that you can utilize it. I'm Dustin Brackett. I'm the CEO and founder of HIVE Strategy. We're a full-service inbound marketing agency that started out of the Denver area, but thanks to COVID, we became a fully remote agency, and it's given us the ability to bring on some amazing talent like Aaron, who is, I would say, 7 hours from me, even though it's like 5. With that, I want to kind of introduce Aaron and kind of turn it over to you to get started. Please feel free to use the Q&A box in your screen. I'll be monitoring questions and interjecting as needed to make sure that questions get answered. We will also have a Q&A section towards the end. With that, Aaron, the stage is yours.
Sweet. Awesome. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining us today. I am going to be talking about HubDB, the most powerful HubSpot tool you're probably not using. And I say you're probably not using it because, well, a couple of reasons. Either you've never heard of it, you don't know how to set it up, or maybe like Jory said, you're just a little intimidated by it. So today I want to try to hit a lot of the high points of the feature itself and spend a good bit of time on some use cases, try to get your wheels turning about how you could possibly use HubDB for your website. And like Dustin said, feel free to ask any questions in the chat and we'll circle back to that at the end. So as I said, I'm Erin. I'm the Web Ops Manager here at HIVE. So I lead our development initiatives and our growth-driven design program. And as anyone on the team will attest, I am a gigantic nerd. So I went to entirely too much school. And weirdly enough, none of that was in computer science. So I'm actually a self-taught developer. I've been learning on the job for a little over 10 years now. And when I say over 10 years, I mean, when I was in the first grade, I built my middle school's website and it won an award. So I've been doing this for a while. And as you can see behind me, I'm also a gigantic nerd for music. So been to a ton of concerts, play a bunch of instruments. Anything I can nerd out about, I will take that opportunity gladly. And then I also have 4 canine coworkers who will probably wander in at some point. And so they may be in the background at some point today. But yeah, so that's about me. And today, what I really want to cover, first of all, is what HubDB is. And as Mallory pointed out in the chat, I absolutely love this feature. So I may gush just a little bit about how great it is and how functional it is. So try to look past that over enthusiasm. And then we'll look just briefly at how it works. So I want to show just a few code things. We won't. I can see everybody's eyes glaze over as I start saying code things, but we're going to just like briefly touch on that and then get into some real world examples. So what is HubDB? So the DB stands for database. So HubDB is a relational database that exists within your HubSpot portal. So this essentially allows you to maintain large amounts of structured data in a way that is very intuitive. So if you've ever used a spreadsheet, you know how to populate a HubDB table. So you're already ahead of the curve. And then one of the great things about HubDB is because it's kind of this standalone database, we can query it from all over the website. And so you only have to update it in one place for it to be updated, across all of your website pages. So that's another big plus. And then also, once you have the kind of heavy lifting done at the beginning, you really don't need a developer anymore. So you really don't need me past the setup point, because it really is just kind of that simple. And so I always recommend HubDB, because I think it's a way to empower marketers to make updates often as possible, as often as you need to, because every time Google sees that you updated your site, it's going to kind of boost your SEO. And one of the biggest things I've seen lately is the ability for HubDB to facilitate the user journey. And so what I mean by that is creating front-end controls where users can sort and filter and search your content. So especially if you have large amounts of structured data, chances are if a person lands on the site, they're not going to immediately just see what they were looking for. So giving them that ability to kind of drill down into your content and find what they're looking for is a really engaging way to facilitate that. Let me actually, a lot of people are very visual, so I want to show what this actually looks like. So in your HubDB portal, you'll go to Marketing, Files and Templates, and then HubDB. And then you can have as many tables as you want. I have not hit a limit on tables yet. I did hit a limit on rows at one point that it was somewhere around 10,000. So if you're anywhere under that, you should be good. But so for each table, like I said, very familiar spreadsheet interface. The columns are really what you need set up for you and built into the template. And then all of the rows, you're able to kind of just fill in yourself really, really easily. And then there's some really cool column types that we'll look at in more depth as we go through the examples. But I just want to briefly touch on them here because it's more than just, text and content. You can also use those date, time fields, location I use a lot. Foreign ID is very helpful to link to other tables. And so other rows and other tables you can link together. And then video is actually new. They've only recently added video. So that's very cool and kind of a native way to do that rather than I've used, IDs and stuff in the past. So yeah, a lot of cool things you can do with the columns, and it makes relating the data to each other a lot more interesting. So it's to compare it to a blog, where a blog is something else that you can kind of search and filter and stuff like that. A blog, you're limited to categories, tags, and author. There are some ways to kind of hack that and make it a little different. But for the most part, your blogs are kind of limited in the way that you can sort, filter, those kind of things. And HubDB is sorting and filtering on steroids. So you can do anything you want with it in the HubDB table. So we'll see some examples of like sorting locations by distance from the user, or sorting dates that are upcoming and eliminating things that have already passed. So some really cool ways that you can relate the data to each other. And so that's the relational part of the database that I really like. So for marketers, I think the biggest thing is that HubDB is going to reduce a lot of that anxiety around making updates. So a lot of, like I mentioned before, a lot of people might be intimidated by making updates in the drag and drop editor, or creating an entirely new page might be a little out of their depth. So with HubDB, you're pretty much set. You're set up to just kind of have an easy go of it from that point on. So once you have the columns that you need and they're built into the template, you're pretty much free to do whatever you want. And you can rest easy in knowing that it's very hard to break. It's very hard to put something wrong in a spreadsheet. So that there is that kind of benefit. Main things for marketers that it's hugely scalable. All the structure and the intuitive interface makes it very easy to build off of. And then ease of use. If you've used a spreadsheet, you can use HubDB. My main knock on it is that flexibility component, because as I said, you're really going to need a developer who can set up those columns for you and map those into the template. So there's not a whole lot of wiggle room, but again, that's kind of the trade-off to reduce that anxiety. And as far as developers, I love it because there are so many different things that you can do. Like all the different column types make for some really interesting ways to relate the data to each other, especially with the foreign ID field, where you can relate certain rows in one table to another table. And we'll kind of see some examples of that, because I know it does kind of sound vague when I say it out loud. But other of the great things for developers, the documentation is great. It has a very powerful API. You can do just about anything you want with it, as long as you can, sit there and read the documentation and trial and error until you get it, which is how I learned it. I mentioned before we started recording, so when we were chatting earlier, that there is a little bit of a learning curve for developers. So really, to get the most out of this, you need somebody who has some familiarity with these very specific Hubble functions. So Hubble is the templating language of HubSpot. So it's like HTML, but specific to HubSpot. And so there's a little bit of a learning curve to that. And then there's some specific HubDB stuff that's, even more of a learning curve. But once you get the hang of it, it's actually very fun, very fun to use. And it's very reliable. I always feel 100% confident in handing off HubDB sites for clients who, to just kind of take it and run with it and not really need me anymore. So yeah, I enjoy that part of it as well. Okay, so like I said, hey, bear with me for just a second, and we're going to talk about some of the code stuff, and then we'll get into some cool examples. But first I want to talk about the materials. So materials are things we can make with HubDB. So first of all, obviously the table. You can also make a module, a template, which can be used on pages, and then emails. So the HubDB information can be used throughout your HubSpot portal. Even so far, I've done custom code blocks in Ops Pro that create HubDB rows and tables and things like that. So this information is accessible throughout your portal, which is really nice. And so our methods then, so what we're kind of building towards with those materials are these dynamic pages and programmable emails. I'm just going to briefly touch on the programmable emails because I don't really have a lot to show and tell on those. I do have a project in the works where we're building out some automated emails that send offers to users based on products that they have browsed. So all of the products live in HubDB, and we have some tracking codes that triggers when they've seen X amount of products, and it'll bring in those products from HubDB, populate the email, and send out. So that's a pretty cool use case. I wish I had more that I could poke around on and show y'all, but for today, we're gonna mostly hang out on these dynamic pages. By far my favorite thing that you can do with HubDB are these dynamic pages. So we'll get into some use cases and kind of start at the module level and work our way up to dynamic pages. But yeah, you'll get a much better idea of what that means and how it works. It's just a little easier to show you. Cool. So like I said, if you have content that needs to be regularly updated, categorized, searched, filtered, you want to, be able to maintain a large amount of data. If it's very structured and you want, a bunch of very similar pages, similar design, but with the data swapped out, HubDB, I suggest you very strongly consider it. It will make your life easier, I promise. So this is a non-exhaustive list. The possibilities really are endless with HubDB. So just because you may not see your use case you have in mind on here does not mean it can't be done. In fact, if you have ideas other than this and would like to talk to somebody who's a huge nerd about this, please hit us up and I would love to try to explore some more use cases. But kind of the basic ones, anything with events, products, team pages, career listings, resource centers, maps and locators, and then PPC landing pages. So all very different kind of benefits to doing it the HubDB way. So we'll see some of that here in a second. Cool. So the first example I want to get into is this event slider. So this is just a basic module. The table has these high school sporting events, and they're able to keep the date and the time and the location. So they have across the site, they have these sliders kind of in the footer, and they wanted to be able to have all of the events on all of those pages without having to go to every page and update them every time. So the way we did that was through HubDB. And let's take a look at so we'll look at the table first. So here's that date and time. It's actually a really simple table, just it doesn't even scroll, like there's just this little bit of information. And that outputs to a module. So we're gonna So here's our module, and it's automatically populated by that table. And the way that looks from the editor is you can select that table directly from this dropdown. So this dropdown will populate with all of the published tables that you can select from. And so whatever table you select, that's what will populate here in the module. And so this custom field type for custom modules exists to grab both a HubDB table and a HubDB row. So you could potentially have a module where, if you had a whole bunch of products and you wanted to spin up a landing page that had like a thumbnail of some very specific products, you could have a module where you just select those individually, or you could have one that finds related based on some factor. So that's a good way to use those within a module. And it, the output is endless. That's why I really like those date time fields, is because you can format that in just about any way. And so it really frees up the design a lot as well.
And Aaron, just to jump in, we did have a question about what is the most common reason you utilize HubDB?
Most common, I would say either teams or resources. So teams where, it's actually this next example, but team pages where you're going to have, maybe you need to quickly add and remove or edit team members, and they all need their own individual page. So essentially you're trying to reduce that manual labor at the beginning of onboarding a new team member. So instead of having to build them a new page and add them to the listing page and all this, you can just add a row to this table. So Let me log back into my other account and we will take a look at that. But that and resources, I think I recommend it most for these dynamic page scenarios, because I feel like it's just so much easier than building a new drag and drop page from a template. Even if you're just cloning things, it's still a little more headache to do it that way, and there's a little more wiggle room and room for error. So this becomes kind of the simplest solution. So for these team members, they all live in this table, and then their page path is here. So anytime you're using a dynamic page, you need to do two things. So in the settings, you'll toggle this on to create the dynamic page using row data. And so that will automatically add these page title and page path. So now when I go to the page itself, I am pulling in the table data here in these advanced settings. So the source for the dynamic page, you select from this dropdown, and that's how this template, so the team HubDB template, knows where to get that data from. And then once it has the data, it bases the information shown on the page on the URL. So once I click to John's page, I'm going to see this new page path created after the listing page. And yeah, so that's kind of the easiest way to get from A to B. And so, you can also tag these, I believe, in this table. You can have, different tags, so you can display them on different parts of the page. You can set a specific order. So I think, yeah, so team pages and then resources are also a good one, especially if you can consolidate that, those forms so that you're not having to use a different form for every resource. What we've done in the past is add a hidden field to the form that is then populated by some JavaScript on the page, again, based on this URL. So whatever page you're on. And that's actually, we use that in this next case study, I believe. Yeah. So getting a little more complicated. So up to now, we've seen it in a module, we've seen it in a dynamic page. So now we're going to look at a dynamic page that's drawing data from more than one table. So with this, with this client, so they were growing very, very fast, and adding locations required building them a landing page, adding a form to that landing page, building them a thank you page for that. And so anytime they added a new location to this, growing like a weed franchise, it was taking a lot of man hours to even just get them up and running. And so one of the main problems that I wanted to solve was that, let's make spinning up a new location really easy. So we did that with this by having, so they have locations, and then each location has a bunch of different camps. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So I mentioned one of the cool things was the location field type in the columns. So you can do some really cool things with the field types, where I can enter my zip code, and now I have sorted their locations by distance from me. And then you can also do that automatically by just clicking the button. So then when we get to this location, so this is a single location. Here's my listing page. Here's my page path. So this form is the same on every single location page, but there's a hidden field that populates with whatever name is in the table, and that goes into their workflow. And so that's how they kind of route all of their emails and requests. And it's much simpler than having, a form for every location, a workflow for every form, which is kind of how it was set up. So we really consolidated a lot with this particular case study. And then the location, or the camps at each location. So there's this data here. All of this is coming from the table. And then this is actually coming from a module on the page, so that they could have, this would appear across all the camp pages. And so those are connected. And again, this sign up is based on what page you're on. So when they click that, it'll automatically go to the right place. So yeah, some cool things you can do here with the API. And then as this is all a completely custom map with a custom Google Maps API JavaScript. So it's very customizable. Yeah, and it turned out really cool, and it worked really well for them. So that was another kind of successful HubDB implementation. And I think there's no telling how many hours it has saved them, because they've added probably 50 locations since we finished the project. So that was a really cool one. For the next one, so this is going to be the most ridiculous thing, most ridiculous HubSpot implementation you'll probably see, at least for a while. It's definitely the most ridiculous one I've seen.
But the one you nerded out on the most, right?
Oh, 100%, 100%. So the problem, we had a similar problem with them when they came to us. They had all kinds of like manual processes to get the content up and to give people permissions and to do all kinds of things. And so what we really wanted to accomplish was taking all of that out of their hands and automating it as much as possible, and kind of getting it down to like the lowest common denominator. Like, what is the easiest way we can accomplish this from a marketer perspective? So we've got 28 tables. There's 3 different levels of child tables. So there's a child within a child within a child. And then there are supplemental tables that are also connected through foreign ID fields. And then this is for a learning management system. So this is also using HubSpot's private content. So you have to be a member who's logged in order to view the content. And then they wanted to further restrict access. So not just the main page, but to individual grades, because they sell it in discrete grade packages. So they wanted to be able to control that. And the problem with that was that, as we've seen, those dynamic templates are all one page. So we had to get a little creative with how we restricted access. And so I'll show you that. It's definitely very cool. And then we also have some automation around user management that also creates HubDB tables and rows and manipulates that content, which is used in the onboarding process when they have a sale. So let's take a look. Let me close out of my umpteen windows. Okay, so we'll start off here. So this is the main listing page, the main template. There's only one template here that you'll see. So let me show you what those tables look like so you'll know kind of where we're at. So the curriculum has 3 different tracks. We're going to look at paths program and drill down into that. So for this row, it knows to get more data from this child table. So for that child table, So each child table is going to have all the different grades. So the grades are the ones that I want to restrict access to, and they are each going to have their own child table as well. So the grade, so we have the grade units, which also has a child table. But as we drill into this, so we've seen how the child tables relate to each other. We can also use these foreign ID fields. So I can select, which unit it should be related to, which lesson it's related to, and I can actually change what these drop downs say. So if I wanted to say like name, so now I can just pick from a drop down of everything that's in the table associated with this column. So really cool stuff you can do with that. So that's kind of how under the hood, how they're all related to each other. So what that looks like here, this main page, here's our 3 tracks. Right, the one you're seeing now is that paths program. So each program has a grade. Each grade has multiple units. And you'll see up at the top, these are the paths that are just, this is the child table within a child table. So then once we get down into the units, each unit has different lessons. And then it also has supplemental materials. So all of that is coming from these tables. So when you want to add automatic through all the pages in your portal and trying to figure out, what module you put this information in, you just go to the table. If you're adding grade 6 stuff, you know exactly where to find that. So the information architecture was really important for this project, just for that scalability factor. And then another cool bit here is how the access is restricted. So you have to be a member to be able to log into this page. So when I go to these settings here, where'd it go? Oh, here it is. So I'm controlling the audience access. Only people who have access to the LMS can view the page. But as I said, we want them to not only have access to the page, but have granular access to those grades. So in this setup module, they have the ability to add any table that they want to restrict. So if they add in the future, if they add, more lessons, more units, grades, whatever, they can select those here in the dropdown and add as many lists as they want to restrict that to. So now only members who can see the page and are also members of these lists can view that content. So I'll show you what that looks like. And I can show you that actually in this editor. So if I'm viewing as me, I'm a super admin, so I have access to everything. And if I log in as Alejandro, I'm shouting you out here. Alejandro was helping us out with the QA process. So he only had access to the ones he was QAing. And so all these others are grayed out and you actually can't click on those at all. So they'll be able to see content that they don't have access to, but not actually access it. So this was a really, really intense application of HubDB, but as Dustin said, I had way, way too much fun with this. And it was, it was a very fun, creative problem to solve. So yeah, that was very cool. And the last thing I wanted to show y'all, let's see, is just this testing setup. So one thing that you, one kind of quirk of this is, all of these dynamic templates are one specific page. So if I wanted to see what was on the assessments page or the podcast page, for example, I can't get to that in the page editor. Now, granted, all the content that I should be editing really is in the table, but for this specific use case, we wanted to have kind of a hybrid scenario. So in this setup, we can turn testing mode on and edit, let's say, podcasts. And so that'll bring up the podcasts page for us to look at. And what I did with this was actually created an extra drag and drop area within the HubDB template. So I'm going to refresh this page. And now I have this podcast flex section, and I can, it works like any other drag and drop. So I can add modules or sections or anything like that. So it's kind of a hacky way to get around the fact that you can't really edit pages in this editor. But I'm just going to say it every time, mostly, I mean, a lot for myself, but for everyone else, always, always, always turn testing mode off. Because if you leave testing mode on and publish it, it will show whatever page you had it testing on all of the pages. So not a situation you want. Always, always, always turn testing mode off. Cool. So that's all of my show and tell examples and whatnot. I hope you can take away from this that HubDB is awesome. Hopefully some of my enthusiasm maybe rubbed off on y'all. You can do a lot of stuff with it, modules, pages, emails, and it's all, really functional, really cool stuff that can be really helpful, especially with like automation and things like that. And as I've said, it's great for content that needs to be updated, searched, filtered, all that kind of good stuff. If you need content that is related to other content on your site, and you need a central place to edit all of that, HubDB is definitely the way to go. And with that, I know Dustin's been monitoring questions, but so if y'all want to pose a few and get those answered.
Yeah. So there was a question of, have there been any recent changes to how HubDB works that's improved the way you use it?
Yes. So they recently added the ability to add videos natively. So they're kind of always improving on those column types, which is really cool. And I very much appreciate that about HubSpot. And then they're also, it's in beta right now, but it will be rolling out soon, but the ability to drag those rows. So you don't have to have a column with the order number. You'll be able to just kind of drag them around and edit that. So yeah, one thing I love about HubSpot is that there are very frequent improvements, and HubDB is no exception.
Awesome. Another question, how did you first get your feet wet with the HubDB API?
So this was maybe 6 years ago or 5 or 6 years ago. My first agency job was very much sink or swim, trial by fire. Here's a project, good luck. And so I'm a self-taught coder, so it's really not that much of an ask for me to kind of pick up these different languages, but it's definitely a little bit of a learning curve in that respect. But it's been 5 or 6 years for me now, so I'm very used to it, and can do all the fun stuff now.
And there is also really good, one thing that HubSpot really excels at, I think, is documentation. So there is a lot of great documentation on the HubDB API and how HubDB works as well. So kind of going through the knowledge base and things like that is also a great place to start.
For sure. And there's also the HubSpot developer community. So if you're trying your hand and hit a wall, that's a great place to start. And then there's also a HubSpot developer Slack where you can ask some questions like that and try to get those answers there.
Awesome. One thing that you kind of touched on briefly, but the question of, can you leverage HubDB in marketing emails?
Yeah, so that's the programmable email aspect of it. So the programmable part can be basically worked into your automation, so used in different workflows. So you could show things from your HubDB table based on parameters in your workflow, which is a really cool use for that. But then also just one of our clients has a ton of different products, and their salespeople need to be able to put together, bundle offers really quickly, but they're not necessarily like set in stone anywhere. They're kind of up to the salesperson. So there's also a way where you can do the module, and they can just go in and either manually select products or filter which products they want to show, and then send emails that way.
Awesome. Another question about how different teams and departments may be able to leverage HubDB, specifically thinking about the sales team. Any thoughts on how a sales team may be able to kind of utilize HubDB for their processes?
For sure. So one cool use case that I don't think we showed is this events page. So this is strictly a sales enablement tool. The site itself doesn't get a ton of traffic, so we're trying to get really specific people and drive some offline interaction. And so this is a way the sales team can put in all of the locations that they're going to be and when they'll be there. You can, again, this is another one of those, you find nearby. They'll tell you where the next one is. They can click join. And then this form, it will automatically pass that information to the sales workflow to say, okay, this person said they're going to come to the California event. And then we also added this bit of, maybe they're not going to be at the event, but would like to connect in the area. And so if they select this, it actually sends that to certain salespeople who are going to be at that event. So within the actual, let's see, within the HubDB table itself. So the sales reps have their own table. And so for each event, you can relate that sales rep to who's going to be there. And then we're actually setting up some a workflow where if someone is going to be at that event and wants to meet up, it'll actually text the salespeople and just let them know. So that's a pretty cool use case for that. I think also the ability to kind of track things pretty granularly as far as, even though it's one template, it's one page, HubSpot tracks all of those pages individually. So you get really, really clean data from all of that. So that's a great sales enablement tool to be able to say, here's all of the products they've viewed, or here's, a form that they interacted with and they've, met some other criteria. So there's kind of there's a lot of ways that you could use it. Another one is with those PPC landing pages, having really specific information for each landing page related to buyer persona and related to not search intent, but like click intent, can help as you're following up on people who converted on that landing page.
Awesome. What part of Hubble markup had the biggest learning curve for you?
Hubble markup. Honestly, it's just getting used to all of the different functions and tags. Because as you're kind of learning a new language, you don't really know what your options are unless you know those tags and functions. So just getting acquainted with everything that you could do and kind of seeing some like examples in the wild of like, working with other developers who have done certain things, being able to kind of see, why would you need to split a string and why would you need to loop through it that way? There's a lot of like methods that are not necessarily intuitive, but can be picked up pretty quick. I think that's I think just knowing or just sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Really just spending time in that documentation will get you over that hump, because it's really just, as you're trying to like problem solve with your code, if you don't know those tags and functions, you don't know what pieces you have at your disposal. So just getting acquainted with those is the biggest piece, I think.
It's pretty consistent, I think, for HubSpot that like there's a lot of power there, and I think everyone in the event today has probably experienced that you don't know what you don't know, and HubSpot can do so many things, and like there's so many different applications it's being used to do a million different things, and so I think that just thinking about, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here? And what are my options to do it? Because at least in my experience with Erin, there's a way. She just may have to figure it out.
There's a way. Right. Yeah. We've had more than a few clients come to us with, the outline of what they thought needed to be done. And I was like, oh no, I can automate that. We can find a better way. Let's break it down, like break the problem down to its kind of component parts and see what HubSpot can do, because there is a way.
Right. And then a question around custom objects in HubDB. So if you can use HubDB to efficiently make a real estate listing page, for example, and then you could essentially use the table to manage listings and properties and things like that, right?
Correct. And one thing that I did not cover here today, but is very important to note, is custom objects can be used in dynamic pages the same way that HubDB can. So in dynamic pages and in modules, actually. So you can have a module where there's a drop-down selector and you select from your products or you select from your deals. And so one client that we're doing a product inventory for, it is all it's not even a custom object. It's just your regular HubSpot product object. So there is overlap there. So if your listings are in HubSpot as like a product or a deal or something like that, doesn't necessarily need its own HubDB. But yeah, as far as real estate, especially for those, the location field and being able to say like, find houses in this radius or things like that, that math becomes a lot simpler if you have it plugged in this way.
Yeah. And then what is the most creative way that you've implemented HubDB?
Creative. I mean, so I really like the path stuff because it's very complicated. As far as just like outside the box, what I've done is the testing interface that you can also bring up a drag and drop section. Because that was a problem I had been trying to solve for a while, because a lot of clients do come and say, there's a lot of it that is structured, but there's some of it that's not. And so kind of finding a balance between those two things can be tricky. And there's definitely not a whole lot of there's not a lot of people out in the HubSpot developer community who are doing things like this. So kind of had to blaze that trail myself. And I think it turned out really cool. And it's not something I see a lot of other developers doing, is kind of putting those controls in. So yeah, I like to use it, like I said, to just empower people to not need me as much. I mean, I love to be needed, don't get me wrong, and I would like to keep a job. So I do want people to need developers sometimes, but it can be such a time suck and just barrier to getting those updates made that I find it very valuable to put those controls in whenever possible.
And what you're specifically talking about is that test mode that you showed us earlier. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This testing mode, and just being able to click here and then refresh. And now I have this podcast flex section. So if I'm not on the podcast page, if I want to show webinars instead, now webinars has its own flex. So this flex section is different than the other because it only lives on this page and it's all accessed through this testing mode interface.
Awesome. Are there any common limitations you run into with HubDB?
Yeah, so it's not a good fit if you want to do a lot with the styles. If each page needs to be vastly different, here, this is a good way to drop in a few modules at the bottom, and then those Kid Strong pages had some ways to have global content that was controlled at the page level, but yeah, it can be frustrating because there's not there's not a lot of that flexibility. There's not a lot of wiggle room. So that's probably the most common objection is yeah, that's cool, but I want to be able to change the font and the padding and add different images and all that kind of stuff. So that's really the only limitation that I see right now. And if HubSpot would just add a repeater field to the columns, I'm telling you, it'd be game over.
Somebody get HubSpot on the phone.
I know, right?
Awesome. I think that is all of our questions. If anything does come up after this session, please don't hesitate to reach out. Erin's email was on the final slide. We'll also be sending out the recording and all of that, so please don't hesitate to reach out if questions come up or you run into a wall, or even if you're just kind of getting started and need a little bit of guidance. We're definitely here to help. I want to thank everyone for attending today, and thank you, Erin. Great presentation. Love seeing you nerd out like that.
I know.
Cool things that we're able to do with HubDB. We will have another event coming up in Q4, and I hope to see a lot of you at Inbound coming up the first week of September. If you haven't been in person, I highly recommend it. It's a blast. They just announced Barack Obama is going to be speaking, amongst other great speakers. And yeah, we'll follow up here with the recording and see you at the next one.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.